Welcome to the Marshall Pruett podcast, presented to you by the Justice Brothers and Cooper Tires, and a brand new show debuted last week. All interviews. It's Inside the Sports Car Paddock. Myself, my Weekend Sports Cars co-host Graham Goodwin. It's a simple mission. Going to go out and grab interviews with folks who we hope you might enjoy from the world of sports car racing. And in this edition, knowing that last week with our launch, Graham being in Bathurst and busy covering content there, figured, we're going to make this one pretty heavy. So our second episode is indeed, by and large, the Graham Goodwin interview show. And we are going to kick off, though, with one that I happened to capture with our friend Jeff Braun, race engineer for the Core Autosport Nissan on-road DPI team, also someone who has engineered and led cars in the GT Daytona Pro-Am class. Wanted to start off with Jeff because we have a very timely item, that being on Friday. IMSA announced there were 2 drive time penalties that have altered the outcome of the Rolex 24 at Daytona, moving one car off the podium altogether to the back of the field, and another car to the back of GT Daytona. So I figured, why not get some insights on what is required here? Not only manage drive time, what do the rules say? How does a team go about planning and making sure that every driver gets their minimum drive time, also does not exceed the maximum drive time? What kind of strategy is at play? How do you do this? Found out some very interesting things of how in the race they're actually looking at what other teams are doing with their drivers and plotting against them. Also tells us about the software and tools that are used and such, so knowing that drive time just came up and just changed the outcome of the Rolex 24. We're going to kick off with Jeff, really bringing us deep inside all of that. Then we're going to move into all of Graham's awesome interview acquisitions from down under at Mount Panorama. Going to kick off with David Brabham there, so David is up second overall in the list of interviews, speaking about the brand new, amazing BT62 supercar, which he has produced, which just set a lap record on the mountain. Also, after we're done with Brabs, we're going to move right into BMW Motorsport boss Jens Marquardt. Following Jens, get to our pal Chris Reinke, who's the head of Audi's Customer Sport program. And then we're going to close with Kurt Sakzewski, who's the race director at the Bathurst 12-hour. Get some insights from him before we got started in the dark and finished in the dark. An amazing race. So good stuff from Graham. Thanks to him for chasing down a bunch of wonderful interviews. The very basic format here is on a weekly basis. I'll grab a couple of interviews. Graham will grab a couple. We'll put them together, bring them to you earlier in the week. And then a couple days after that, we will have our standard format Weekend Sports Cars show that's driven 100% by you, the listeners, and your questions. All right, well, let's get going with episode 2 of Inside the Sports Car Paddock, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. Jeff Braun, welcome back. Episode 2 of Inside the Sports Car Paddock, my friend. I figure,
it's fun.
Well, you and I gabbing about sports car racing, IndyCar racing, but more often than not, the engineering and technical side. I figured since we had a couple of drive time violations get announced late last week, why not get into that side and hopefully with your help explain not just the rules and how that works, since you have to manage that as part of the Core Autosport Nissan on-road DPI effort, but also the software tools, the management aspect, how that's done, because I'm fairly sure it's not just you with a big clock hanging from the timing stand trying to monitor all 4 drivers, minimum drive time, etc. So why not just, how about week 2 here? Let's try and get folks up to speed on what drive time is like from the team management side and how you facilitate that. So let's just start there. What is it that you have to manage in order to comply with the rules in terms of drive time, knowing that each class and or driver ratings definitely influences the amount of time each driver must complete in order to score points?
Yeah, so it is probably a lot more complex than the average race fan would think. There's about, I'm looking right here, scrolling through it, there's maybe 5 pages in the rule book that deals with drive time. And so what IMSA does is they require, let's take the DPI and GTLM, or what we call the pro classes, where there's no driver ranking restrictions. That's a fairly simple rule by IMSA. They required, and we'll just take Daytona, for instance. They required what's called a base drive time, which is a time that every driver must complete in order for the car to score points. And at Daytona, for the pro classes, DPI and GTLM, that was 2 hours. So every driver in your lineup, whether you had 3 or 4 drivers, had to do 2 hours base time. In the GTD and LMP2 classes, where they have Pro-Am drivers, there's a base time, which is longer, plus there's a minimum time for the AM-rated drivers, the silver or the bronze. And a lot of people wonder, well, why all these complex rules for that? What they want to do is make sure in the Pro-Am classes that the AM drivers contribute significantly to the result, because that's kind of the concept of that class. They don't want a guy doing 5 laps under yellow and getting out and saying he's driven, and then the pros do all the rest of the work. That's not the intent of those classes. So they make the minimum time for the AM drivers significant. It was 4 hours and 45 minutes at Daytona.
And you obviously would remember, because you ran your own car, Transact Racing Service. You ran your own IMSA GTP Lights program back in the late 80s, at a time where IMSA came up with what was then known as the Linda Ludeman rule. And that was in Camel Lights, in that class where multiple drivers were required. Linda's boyfriend, Scott Schubot, who was the pro between the two of them, and Linda was not a bad driver, she just was not a high-end amateur. The rules simply said you had to, both the drivers had to drive the car, basically. And so what they would do, in order to maximize the amount of time the best driver was in the seat, is under a yellow, what would look like it would be a long yellow, they'd come in and pit, Scott would jump out, Linda would climb in, she would do her, whatever it was, 1 or 2 laps minimum, then come back in, throw Scott in the car. And that didn't happen at every race. I mean, there were times where she certainly drove a lot longer, but by and large, a rule preventing the, hey, come on now. If you're just skirting things so that this person who is maybe more of a competitive liability than you would like, you're going to throw them in for 2 laps under a caution, that's really not what we're trying to achieve here. So that was decades ago, but this today is essentially a far more formal and structured version of saying, if the silver or bronze rated driver, the non-pro, who's not going to be as fast as the pros, if they're on the entry list and most likely contributing financially to the car being there, we're not going to let you get away with, the 2 laps under yellow kind of thing. They need to contribute just like all the other amateurs in the class and make this a real Pro-Am model.
Exactly. And it was just even very recently, before this rule was even extended further, was Ed Brown had been able to win Daytona doing 5 or 6 laps under yellow. And that's not taking anything away from Ed. Ed was trying to win the race with ESM, and they used the rules to their advantage, and that was the best thing to do to allow them a chance to win the race. It's almost like in spite of themselves. Ed paid a lot of money to go racing, and he wanted to win Daytona, and he wasn't going to compromise that by driving more than he had to, because he admittedly is a semi-pro driver who doesn't make a living driving race cars, and he had hired, really good world-class drivers to do that. Why would you drive if you didn't have to? But in reality, everybody wants to see the guys who are paying for it, the Ed Browns and those people, drive the car a significant amount. So IMSA put that rule in, and now nobody complains, but the point of it is that now no one is able to run less silver or amateur drive time than another person. So that's why IMSA has this rule. So everybody has to track that super accurately, because if you miss it by 10 seconds, the car gets no points. I mean, you essentially finish last. And that's what happened to a couple people at Daytona. this year. So what we do is we are given by IMSA a timing and scoring feed, which is just a bunch of, think of it like a stock market ticker kind of thing. It's just data stream coming into us. And then there are various software packages that will decipher that feed and put it on our screens. And most people have seen the running order and the number of pit stops and all the information that we're getting back. Well, there's two companies, primary companies, well, three actually, that do the software. There's Alcamel that provides the timing and scoring feed to everyone, and they have a basic kind of viewing package, which gives you the basics. Most teams go for some very sophisticated software that each team licenses at the start of the year, and the two big ones are called Race Tools and HH Timing and Scoring. Both of those packages are similar in what they do, and they will allow the teams to view the data that's coming in from timing and scoring in whatever way they want to view it. You can manipulate the data, you can make reports, you can have it give you alerts and alarms, and it's super tunable for what you want. Well, one of the things that everybody looks at is drive time, and it measures the drive time of the drivers. And that's recorded when the car crosses the pit exit line, leaving the pits. There's a line there where they can take the speed limiter off. That starts their drive time. And their drive time stops when they enter the pits and hit that cone where they have to put the speed time on. So the big thing is, if you have even a pro class, we have to hit the base time. We have to hit 2 hours with every driver. The Pro-Am classes have to hit, at Daytona, they have to hit their 4 hours and 45 minutes with all of their Am-rated drivers. And so that's something that we monitor all the time. It's something it's a real target that every team has to hit. And not unlike a fuel mileage target or a tire length target, it's required, because you will score no points unless you do that.
And so, obviously, in a fully pro class, Jeff, that's one thing for you to consider. But you've been a part of Pro-Am engineering, Pro-Am entries as well. You give us some insights, because I never had to do this back when I was, an engineer and a whatever team manager. To this level, I never had to do anything like this. How do you, or what's the general process, you believe, for structuring not just driver rotation, but knowing that, okay, we're going to want to put so-and-so in at the start, we're going to want this person to go second, hey, this person's particularly good in the dark, maybe their eyesight's better than the others. And you've got all the normal, this is how we want to structure our driver rotation and how many stints they might do based on a number of competitive criteria. How do you also factor in I'm also a clock manager and have to achieve this secondary thing of, hey, let's go try and win the race, but I can't overextend this, driver A because they're awesome and risk not having driver B or C get in their minimum drive time or etc. How do you formulate all that in going to try and win a race, create a strategy, while also trying to tick the box on minimum drive time?
Yeah, it's you've kind of described it. It's a lot of balls in the air, moving parts to manage. So, first thing, there's some basics. One, in a long race like Daytona, the big thing is to first figure out how long your drivers can physically go. Each car is different. Each driver's fitness level is different. Some of the AM drivers are, by the very nature, not pros. They don't do this for a living, and they're not as fit. They don't spend hours and hours a day in the gym all the time. So you kind of figure out what they could run in a stint length. So let's say Daytona, you could in a LMP2 car we'll take. You could probably run 3 stints. So that's going to be about an hour and a half or hour and 40 minutes. That's a normal stint. So then the other basic is, again, by definition, your AM drivers are not as fast as your pro drivers. So they are going to get behind against other pro drivers. So we will actually look at, we don't only watch the drive time of our driver to make sure that he's getting the minimum in. We will actually try to work strategically to have our pro driver in the car when their AM driver's in the car. And that gives us an advantage because, and other teams are doing the same thing. It's kind of like a football game. You know, we know their strengths, they know our strengths, we know their weaknesses, they know ours, and we're trying to dance around and make sure that we have our strengths when they're at their weak point. And they're doing the same thing. So it's this big game of chess. We can see, okay, they still need an hour left with their one AM driver. They haven't run him yet. Or they've run him and he's only sat out for an hour. They probably can't put him back in right now. So they're going to probably put him in here. We'll try to get our pro driver in when they put their AM driver back in. So there's that aspect of it. The other thing that we'll do is we try to take our hit, is what I call it. The AM drivers are going to be slower than the pros. Try to take that detriment or that hit in performance as early as possible to give you yellow flags to make up that deficit. So on a yellow flag, obviously the field bunches up. So if your AM driver gets behind by 30 seconds and you have a yellow, he catches up and you're right back. You haven't lost anything. But you can't wait till 1 hour from the end of the race, put your AM driver in and take that 30-second hit because you're unlikely to get a yellow to make it up. So you want to kind of front load your AM driver in the race and then run your pros toward the end. So, and most people take that strategy. So it's a big chess match to see what they're doing, what we're doing, what all the other teams are doing, and still get the drive time done properly so that you don't, want to follow the rules.
Another thing that happens we should share, Jeff, is, as you mentioned, every team opts into or buys some sort of higher level of data extrapolation software so that they can indeed see how others' drive time numbers are playing out. And you'll get two things happening. If you do start getting towards the end of a long race like this, in whichever class, you will have those who are seeing, hey, looks like so-and-so is coming up a little bit short, and I don't know if they're going to be able to either get that person in the car in a natural capacity, right? Or would they have to make an unscheduled, really a very detrimental pit stop to try and get a driver back in just to get in some of that extra time? And then you also have another thing, which I know has happened because I've been told, or I've asked and been told, is that race control is not, when possible, they're not necessarily just sitting there with their mouths shut, watching a violation coming into focus and saying nothing, allowing it to just happen. I know for a fact that if IMSA is seeing, hey, we're getting into the last hour of the race, and car number 2, driver A is short 10 minutes, you just might want to consider doing something here. Do know that those messages come down from race control via SMS. Don't want to say it's in every instance. It's not their responsibility to make sure that teams are paying attention to their own business and getting it right. But I do find it interesting, though, that you have the dynamic of competitors looking to see, like, ooh, that might be the weak one of the herd. We might be able to pick that one off because they haven't either scheduled their driver rotation properly or haven't managed their time correctly for each driver. But then you also have race control, when possible, trying to help teams to not get themselves sent to the back of the field in the final results like we had with a couple of drivers on Friday.
Right, exactly. I mean, IMSA doesn't want to penalize people, so they'll try to help. It's not their responsibility, and if they don't mention it to you, you have no recourse. I mean, it's your responsibility, but there's an added complexity that we haven't talked about. Not only is there minimum drive times for AM drivers and pro drivers, there's also what's called it's the infamous 4 in 6 rule. And it originally came about to make sure that drivers didn't fatigue and just get tired and, make mistakes or crash or something like that. So IMSA only allows a driver to drive 4 hours in any 6-hour period. And that seems pretty straightforward. Okay, so, you have, in the 24-hour race, you have 4 6-hour periods, 0 to 6 hours, 6 to 12, 12 to 18, and 18 to 24. But that's not exactly the way it works. The way it works is a 6-hour period starts when your driver gets in. So if your driver gets in at hour 2, his 6-hour period, first 6-hour period, ends at 8 hours, and he can only drive 4 within that. So you could drive him an hour, sit him out for an hour, drive him for 2 more, sit him out for 1, drive him for 1 more in that 6-hour period. The problem comes in is at the end of the race, there's another 6-hour period that goes from the end of the race backwards. And so you can have a driver overlapping 2 6-hour periods there where they could conflict with each other. He might have to get out because he's going to be too long in the first one, and yet you can't put him in because he can't go to the end yet. So the software, it's a very tricky calculation, and the software helps a bunch because it will actually give us the earliest time that every driver can get in the car and drive to the end of the race. And of course, at the end of the race, everybody puts their fastest guy in. So it's great for us to know, for instance, that, whatever car, the Penske car, here's their driver lineup, and here's when they can put their guy in and run him to the end. And we may be able to see that they can't put their fastest guy in until 2 hours from the end.
Yeah.
Or we could put our fastest guy in 3 hours from the end. And we'll actually try to manipulate our driving time in the middle of the race to give us that advantage.
It's all kinds of fun, and this is the race strategy side that I love. I hope, to close here, Jeff, that this is something that NBC Sports, as they continue to wrap their production sensibilities around IMSA, will spend more time on this, because the cars going around the track, going quickly, I mean, that's great, that's awesome, that's why we watch, but there's also this very interesting war going on every timing stand in every class, trying to manage all of the things that you have mentioned, and that it's a place where differences and aptitudes definitely play out in the final results. It's not just our drivers drove faster than yours, it's how did we order those drivers? Where did we choose to get this amount of time done compared to that amount of time done, if we're talking minimum drive time and such? It's just, there's this really interesting orchestration that, if done correctly, ends up helping a team succeed where otherwise they might have had a fairly average result. And it's just a little minutia here that, you've been doing for decades and decades, and I did for a far shorter amount of time, but I love this stuff, and I hope our listeners love this stuff, and I also look forward to us trying to do this on almost, if not a weekly basis, of just trying to pick different tech topics, whether it's things that folks send in to you on your Facebook page. You've been very, very kind in trying to educate fans and fellow racers about engineering stuff, technical side, even strategy bits here, so yeah, I think this, at least for me, this is going to be a particularly fun aspect of this show.
I look forward to it. It's what makes sports car racing pretty cool. Like this right here, I mean, strategy is part of racing, and in IndyCar or Formula One, there's strategy that is in one area, and this is unique to sports car racing, and it is not just making the rules. It's a strategic thing that all the teams look at to gain an advantage on how we're going to use the drive time rules and how we can manipulate it, and it's something unique to sports car racing. So I love talking about it, and anything we can discuss technically or strategic wise, I'm looking forward to it. Let's do a bunch more of these.
Now I'm going to have a T-shirt made up that says Jeff Braun, good at strategery. So that's coming up next, my friend. Well, I know you... well, actually, let's close on this. So what we're speaking here on a Saturday afternoon. You're at home in Ovalo, Texas, in the Brown family race shop, coming off of last weekend where we all got soaked and just a crazy event at the Rolex 24. So what's Jeff Braun doing on a Saturday afternoon? Just relaxing and convalescing? No. Tell folks the kinds of things you're working on, even though we're still, 5-6 weeks out from Sebring.
Well, when you called, I had 3 screens up here, one with data from Daytona, another with my geometry program looking at front roll centers on the Ligier and rear roll centers and roll rates and lateral load transfer distribution graphs of trying to figure out what we're going to test at Sebring in a couple weeks and figure out how to make this Nissan go a little quicker, get over the bumps and everything. And for the background thing, I have 12 hours of Bathurst going on watching the fantastic GT3 race there while I'm trying to figure out how to make this car go faster. So it's, I would say I'm at work, but I'm not sure I really actually ever work. I'm trying to figure out how to make race cars go faster. John Bennett is gracious enough to pay me to do that. So, if I can keep avoiding having a real job for a few more years, I will have almost made a lifetime of never having a real job. So that's my Saturday. Good
man. Well, one of the many reasons why we love you, even on a day where you should be just kicking up your feet and relaxing, you're still putting in that work. But that's also, honestly, it's not a mistake. The reason that the Core Autosport team has been a success for many years is instead of kicking it into neutral and idling, you'll still take that time to try and get ahead and move things forward when in reality you should hopefully be catching some Z's. So, all right, Jeff, I'm going to let you back to your day. Thank you as always, my friend, and look forward to hopefully speaking next week.
Sounds great, Marshall. I look forward to it. Thanks.
In the Bathurst paddock, just before we get to Super Pole for the 2019 Bathurst 12 Hour, and we bump into a legendary name, and there's a legendary name on the side of the car we've got behind us, and the legendary name that's applied to the bloke who's about to talk to us, David Brabham. What a pleasure it is to see you here.
G'day, mate. How you doing? Bathurst is such a special place for a lot of fans and drivers who have raced here, and obviously from a family point of view, my father won here in 1960, and my brother Jeff and I won here at Bathurst, and Matthew's won here as well. So from a family point of view, there's a lot of great history here, and to come here with the Brabham BT62 and walk away with a kind of track record is such an achievement. Super proud of every member of the team, all the people, all the suppliers, everyone who's been involved in this project. This is an extremely proud moment. We'll look back in time and go, that was the start,
And it's going to be a journey. There's been plenty of steps on the way since you stepped away full-time from being a professional race driver into the Project Brabham moments. Maybe talk a little bit about that. But now into this new era. That car is a stunning-looking piece of kit. It sounds absolutely fantastic. And there's, I can say, 4 or 5 deep here in people as the car's been pushed out now after its final demo laps into the sunshine, and it's the car people want to look at.
It is. I mean, I think there's a great combination here. That is the brand, obviously, because of the success. It's Australian-made brand in a way, with international success. And you've got a great-looking car made here in Australia, here at Bathurst. I mean, the combination, you couldn't get better, really. So it's certainly become a massive crowd favourite.
Let's talk a little bit about the brand. We talk about brand, but it's your family brand.
Yeah.
And you fought very hard to regain control of that after what I'm sure was a few dark days for the way in which that brand was being mistreated.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that was... how long have you got? Yeah, I mean, I'm glad I took up the challenge. I had a vision that Brabham should be back onto the world stage. I had no idea what or how. This is when I was 40. I'm now 53. So the vision started back then. And, of course, then I found out that someone actually had registered Brabham and Brabham Racing in Germany, and that meant then what could I do if someone owned the name? So I took the choice of trying to get it back. And it was a 7-year process. Christmas Day 2012, I got confirmation that the name was back under the family control. So that was a big moment. But that was also the start of the next chapter. So just trying to find a way of doing it. And it takes time. It takes time to go down all these different paths to find the right partners at the right time, and certainly found that with the guys I've got here with the project, with Fusion Capital behind it. We've got the money, the expertise, and together we've come up with the Brabham BT62 and the next chapter of an iconic name.
I want to talk about the BT62 and the journey you're going to be taking back into motorsport with the Brabham name. Let's cover off quickly, though, the waypoint on that journey, which was Project Brabham. Huge enthusiasm about that.
Yeah.
I guess the question is, what then happened? What happened in the process that followed that incredibly successful initial burst?
Well, to be honest, it was a little bit of a surprise how well it went, because it was a sporting crowdfunding campaign to find out whether people would be interested in much more interesting content, I would say, from a fan and a driver and an engineer experience, if we opened the door up a lot more and people got an insight into how this environment works. Because it's intense pressure, people have to make quick decisions. And I've always thought, when I was racing at Le Mans, the best stuff's inside the garage. So how do we get that out into the public? Because that's in some ways more interesting than watching the cars go around the track. So we created Project Brabham, and it was the most successful sporting crowdfunding campaign at the time. We raised $278,000. 64 countries contributed. So clearly they like the idea, but that's not going to get you a race team. Then you've got to go and find investors, and the whole model was around a subscription-based model, which people said they'd be happy to pay that kind of money for. It's not expensive. So then trying to sell the concept to investors, they're all interested. They said, "Well, come back when you're at another stage." Well, yeah, but I got them have the money to get to that stage. So we ended up having to sort of park Project Brabham and think, well, another way of getting Brabham back out there that Project Brabham would benefit from. And here we are. We've got an automotive company building a high-performance track car. We've got a long-term vision. That includes going racing, which means then Project Brabham comes to life.
So there's payoff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Intellectually, at least for the people that actually put that money down.
Yeah, and they have been a part of that journey, which so anyone who contributed can feel proud to be part of helping to bring the name back, and from my point of view, that hugely grateful for that, because if it wasn't for those people, it wouldn't have got us to the next stage. And then we had, and yes, it was a bloody struggle. There's no doubt about it. There were some dark moments, but I was never going to give up, and I'm glad I didn't, because sitting here today, seeing the car go around on track, seeing the lap record being broken, is in some way the first time of this whole program I can sit back and look at the past and go, wow. Yeah.
We're now looking at this fabulous, beautiful green car behind us, Car 2.
Car 2 of L. Yep.
So give us for the purpose of this interview, just run through some of the figures attached to this car in terms of the performance, in terms of if I was going to come down with my dollars now and put them down, what's it going to take? Just a few of the figures behind this car.
Yeah, I mean, the reason the car is fast and actually nice to drive. I mean, Luke got out of the car and he said the problem with this car is you don't want to go and drive anything else. I thought that was a fantastic comment. So that's an individual validation of what the car can do. It's fine me saying all sorts of things about the car, but we've got somebody else in, go out there and get the job done and see what you think.
Just to be clear, now whilst we can talk about race lap records and qualifying lap records, nothing has ever gone around this track quicker than that car.
No, well, except for a Formula 1 car, but
okay. That's not a bad little heritage.
No, exactly. I mean, in terms of a sports car or a GT car or a touring car, we're the fastest. So, and the reason for that is the way the car's been built. Power to weight is really crucial, and downforce, and we have buckets of that in a way. Not so much on the weight, because that's 972 dry weight. So the car's under a ton. It's got 1,200 kilos of downforce and 700 horsepower from a Brabham 5.4 litre V8. So the combination of that and the weight distribution and the power down and just the way the front goes where you want is a combination where the driver gets a lot of confidence in driving it. And you need confidence here, otherwise you're toast. You know what I mean? So,
absolutely right.
So Luke felt there's more in there. Just felt more and more comfortable in the car as he pushed, and we only had a few laps.
Yep.
So considering the amount of track time we've had this weekend, to break a record like that is an incredible achievement.
We've seen some splitter cam footage of one of the sub 2 minute laps. It went quicker again today. So what was the actual time? 1:50?
It was 1:58.69.
I've heard you say, and I've seen for myself, there's more to come. I'm not going to ask you how much more to come. But it struck me as being significantly more still to come.
There is still more to come, absolutely.
Which brings us to the next phase of this, and that's 2 phases to come. One is that needs to sell units.
Yep.
And the second thing is that you've already announced that you have an intention to come forward with a Le Mans program. Let's talk about first the market interest in the car, because it's not. This is not a cheap automobile. It's not. Not intended to be.
No. I mean, it's a limited edition vehicle. 70 cars. Tailored for ultra high net worths who want to enjoy being part of Brabham, driving a car that's going to challenge them. We'll do our driver development program around that. It'll become an experience, and we're obviously doing the road conversion that's coming out, and and obviously the plans to go to Le Mans. So all those things help to contribute to the interest of the BT62, and we're the first one that will go out this year, and we've had quite a bit of interest, so we're just working through that now.
You're pretty confident of the numbers?
Yeah, no, I've been pretty confident from the word go, because I believe in the project. For sure, these things, we're new to market. People are looking, they're watching to see what we do, and the more we can show and demonstrate who we are and what the car's capable of doing, we've noticed the interest has actually gone up, not down. So,
excellent. So let's move forward now into what I know you hope, we hope, everybody hopes, I think, will be another chapter in Brabham's racing history. You've announced that the intention is to take this car to Le Mans in GTE. Brings with it a couple of questions. You've obviously looked at hypercar, and what that means in terms of the potential for this or something else bearing that brand. The decision has been made. That's not for you.
No. Doesn't align with our product range at the moment. That's a huge investment to go to that next level. Doesn't mean to say that we won't get there in the future, because we just don't know. Let's just focus on what we know we can do.
So tell us about the status at the moment of the discussions that are no doubt underway and the investigations underway about this package or whatever you need to do with this package for GTE.
Well, the GTE will be more in line with the next vehicle.
Okay.
So we're not going to say too much about that at the moment, but what we do here with the BT62 just helps us to gather more and more information. And if we can go racing with the BT62 in a few races in invitational around the world, which is what we're looking at, that starts the ball rolling, gets the team start to come together and build it ready for Le Mans in the future.
Where might we see that fantastic thing race? Where's at the moment on the, not the wish list, but where's it possible that you could race those things?
Well, once we announce that that's what we want to do, there's been several organisations that have approached us, so we'd love to have your car there, obviously, because it'll draw a lot of interest. But we just got to work through what is the right strategy for us, and we're still working through that at the moment.
So to be clear, for GTE, there's a conversation to be had about the next model in the line, so after BT62, and then where we might be with regulations, because of course that might all change in a couple of years. Particularly with hypercar coming.
Yep, and we said when we launched the Le Mans program, it's ambitious. We got to earn the right to grow. So there's a hell of a lot of work to be done to get to that point. But we're not shy in trying. So Brabham's all been about going out there and having a go, and that's what we're doing.
Last question is going to be about what we will see on track at Le Mans, and we very much hope we're going to see that. You're very proud of the Australianness of this. You're very proud of the Brabham name. There's a couple of quick Brabhams out there, but there's a lot of quick. Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of quick Aussies here, and could this be the key in the door to see more Australian talent on the world stage?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, obviously we hope to develop more of a customer program as well, and I'm sure there's a lot of drivers down this pit lane were quite envious of Luke today.
It's a great way to finish it. David, the very best of luck. It is a stunning looking thing, it's a stunning sounding thing, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot more of it. Thanks for the moment, David Brabham.
Thank you.
Jens, it's been an amazing week for the Intercontinental GT Challenge with 3 more factories committing. That brings it to a total of 8. It's not the same, I guess, maybe you can tell me different, as a full factory program that we see in other international series, but tell me from your perspective, from BMW's perspective, what is the appeal of this relatively new 5-race series?
Well, I think it's at the end of the day, as you said, it's a super highly competitive world-class field of cars, drivers, teams. It's iconic racetracks. I mean, Bathurst here it's the very first time that I'm down here, and unfortunately a bit sad the circumstances why, but I've always followed on TV at home, and I always thought that this is really a great racetrack. I personally love racetracks that are built in the natural environment, that are not artificially created like some of the recent tracks that have been built. And and I think it's really super close racing. It's engaging very well in the local markets. It's running in all the markets that are important to us at BMW from our, let's say, customer and fan base point of view. So it's a really good fit for us. And to start off here in Australia and to cover this year Asia with the Suzuka race, Africa with the race in Kyalami in South Africa, luckily back on the calendar, Spa in Europe, one of the classics, and then North America with Laguna Seca. I mean, those are the M markets in the world where we see most cars sold, where we have the biggest fan base, and where we want to be present with a racing program.
I guess that's the wider point, which is what part of the group is driving the interest here. Is it customer racing? Is it M Group? With those markets, you're absolutely right, of course, they are all fantastic markets for performance cars. What is actually which part of the group is driving a program like this?
It's all of them together, because we discuss with everybody together, and we say, look, those are the possibilities that we have. What do we want to achieve? What do we want to achieve for our brand? For M, what do we want to have? And what is the best possible layout? And where does that get combined in the best way? And that's what Intercontinental GT Challenge brought really together, that the top level of GT racing, you can cover the most important markets, all the continents, with one series. And you can do it in a way where you have local teams involved, or you can do it in a way where you do it with 1 or 2 teams. And that's how we decided at the end to do it, that we have at least 2 cars running in all the races, one from Schnitzer and one from Walkenhorst. And if we can obviously have a local team involved as well in one of the races, we try and get that on board as well. The bigger the BMW field, the better, obviously. But it's a very, very good fit for us.
Success is clearly very marketable. Winning pole positions, that's marketable. But what else can we expect at these race meetings? You know, with the involvement of your importers, with the involvement of the corporate marketing PR teams. There's activation here for most of the manufacturers. Are we going to see more of that at all the races this season?
I mean, that's obviously what it's also all about, yeah. And obviously, unfortunately, we were a bit late with our Australian friends this year when we got everything together, because that's obviously the first event in the calendar. But I mean, we have a plant in South Africa, and I know the South African market is extremely eager and keen to be involved in that event down there. In Suzuka, the Japanese market is really looking forward to that happening. US, I mean, we obviously have a racing program in the US, but also there will be active. So it's the good thing that you have a platform where you can get your local markets really joining in, and it's not like other series where it's super high profile, whatever, big investments. It's really something where you at the end of the day get good value for money. So it's really attractive for the markets.
Question apiece really about two of the races in these 5. One of them is going to be about this race, but the other one is about the new edition. It is about Kyalami, and from what I'm being told by the series organisers, this is something that is proving to be extremely popular with the vast majority of the factories that are coming out to play. What do BMW get with the introduction of that race to the calendar?
Well, it's obviously the first race on the African continent for us. We've had the Formula E race in Morocco, but obviously that's extremely close to Europe, and it's really South Africa. It's for us, as I said, we have a plant in South Africa. The market is really strong and important to us, and we have fans, we have really racers down in South Africa that want to see a BMW on the racetrack, and we can bring that down to them, and on the top level of GT racing. And looking at the field here and looking at how competitive that is, I think fans in South Africa will love GT racing coming on that level to them.
And are you looking for the profile of that race to cut through just on a national basis to a continental basis, because it's a huge potential market for anybody?
Yeah, as you said, I mean, this is really very important to us, and we're looking forward to being there.
Last question is about this race. It is a special place. Delighted you're here. Anybody that knows about motorsport is always pleased when they can turn up at Bathurst. It does, I think, seem to a number of people looking at GTC that the introduction of this into the world of SRO GT3 from being a standalone event just a few years ago has enabled that launch of a global platform. How do you see it?
I mean, I think Stefan is the best person to ask about that, but I think it definitely helped. And I mean, it obviously, as you said, it went from a standalone event to being included now into this global series. And I think, Australia. We've just arrived earlier this morning in Sydney and driven up here, and it's really a long time since I've been in Australia for racing, and really not racing in an Australian series, but in a series that is global. I think this really put Australia closer again to the rest of the world when it comes to racing, which is great, because obviously we're all following supercars down here, but this is a pure Australian series, and now to have something really on the global scope, I think is good for everybody. It's an absolute win-win situation.
Last question about GT3. M6 GT3 is here. We've got 2 cars from 2 stunning teams, great driver lineups. This is clearly part of the M marketing strategy as well as the Customer Motorsport marketing strategy. What kind of model cycle are we talking about for the future of BMW in GT3?
I mean, when you look at purely GT3, obviously we have to wait for the next generation of regulations to come out. I think the plan is 2022 for that. Obviously we are in 19, 3 years from now. So, but we are already in 19, so at the end of the day, it's 2 years from now. It wouldn't be smart to bring a car before the new regs. So I think we're anxiously waiting for the regs to be finished. And I mean, obviously we already have in our mind what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And I would say normally I would like to start really now, as soon as the regs are there, with the development work, have a car up and running somewhere late next year, use 21 as a sort of proving year under, hopefully, maybe every once in a while, maybe in SPX or whatever at the Nordschleife, a few events to showcase the car, but also to give it a really hard time in development and proving before giving it to the customers. And then, early 2022 should be out in the hands of the customers.
ask a cheeky question, just pausing for the tape, which is, you've had some success with big front-engine GT cars. Are we going to expect something similar or something radically different?
Well, I mean, the M6 was certainly not the smallest of cars. But if you look at BMW, the front-engine rear-drive concept is basically what makes BMW. So I wouldn't expect us to do anything different in the nearer future. I mean, as long as we are with ICE engines, I think this is the concept that we have been successful with, and this is the concept that we stick to.
Well, in the Audi lounge above the pit lane at Bathurst with Chris Reinke, the head of Audi Sport Customer Racing. Chris, this race, the biggest GT-only race at the start of the racing year, and of course now it's the opening race for what is becoming something of a phenomenon, the Intercontinental GT Challenge. Really a few questions about the role of Audi and your commercial part in particular with this race, and with the what looks like now a massive challenge for other manufacturers across a new 5-race, 5-continent series.
Well, for us, obviously, Bathurst 2019 marks the begin of another Intercontinental GT Challenge, which we have won as a manufacturer the last 3 years, and we'll try our very best to keep that record clean. So that is exciting, and starting that in Bathurst, I think it's a very positive fortune for Audi Sport Customer Racing, because we have been here since the very beginning, since it turned back onto the GT3 regulations in 2011, and had quite some successes out here. Australia is, especially for us at Audi Sport Customer Racing, a very strong market, as it is for Audi Sport as a brand in general. Therefore, it's for us a great start of the season. We love to come out here. We love the attitude of the Australian racing fans, of the Audi Sport community down here in Down Under. And it's, on a personal side, a great change to the cold wetness that we escaped from in Daytona to come into the dry warmth of Bathurst.
You said before you've had some success here. It's not an easy place to win. It's a circuit that kind of rewards cars that are BOP'd in very different manners. Audi has always been lightning quick across the mountain, but sometimes has suffered on straight line speed. It is unique, this place, isn't it?
It's absolutely unique from every angle, as you can see it. As you said, the characteristic of the track is really second to none. With a hill climb in between the long straights. Depending on the characteristic of your car, you have advantages here and maybe some not that optimum setup elsewhere. But in general, it's an extraordinary race where a lot usually happens. So great racing, first of all, but then occasionally incidents. And now, having just seen the very first session, you can tell how intense the race venue kicked off. Lucky us, as far as I'm informed at the moment. No drivers are injured, but obviously big incidents happen. That tells you how strong the competition is. People take it to the edge straight away from the very first practice session onwards, and I think this is what will happen all weekend. With 8 manufacturers signed into the championship, I think there are at least 8 manufacturers here want to win this.
We'll come to our GTC in a moment, because we've had rapid fire, almost a machine gun volley of announcements from manufacturers that want to come and take your silverware from you. Just another quick question about this race. It clearly is now one of the blue ribbon events in GT racing worldwide. We hear from teams, we hear from manufacturers, we hear from drivers that this is on one of their must-attend events. Where does it rank for you? Forget for a moment our GTC, we'll come to that, but where does this event rank for you in terms of its stature on the world stage?
I think for us, and I see that out of the GT3 perspective when I answer the question, it's clearly number 3. For us as a German manufacturer, the Nürburgring is for sure the number 1. And when you look at the quality of GT3 grid, I think Spa is not the number 2. But then it comes to Bathurst, because it is such a unique thing. It is on the other side of the world, and therefore it shines out also over the complete Pacific room for us, and therefore it is a number 3.
And okay, we shift into the reason for sitting with you this morning, which is the IGTC. Is it because of the stature of this event that the IGTC has now got that kind of, at least a part of the kind of momentum that's behind it, and the appeal that it's got for drivers, for teams, and in particular for manufacturers? Now, with 8 signed up for the coming season, 5 races now, and Stefan Rotell's organisation moving forward. Tell us a little bit about Audi Sport Customer Racing's perspective on that growing success story.
I think the growing success of the Intercontinental GT Challenge is not leaning on one event and try to build a championship around it. It's the attempt to put a pro chain together, to find really the ultimate venue per continent, and line them up. And we discussed now Bathurst, which is for sure for Australia as a place to be, and therefore, for the complete regions. We have obviously Spa for Europe. But then if you look at other venues, last year starting in Suzuka was an extraordinary success straight out. That event will grow as well, I'm for sure. For the US, we have with Laguna Seca track was a legend, second to none. So therefore I also foresee a great development of that race. And the same situation I think we're going to face on the African continent with the pick to go to Kyalami. So I think that is really the secret of success, that not only do we have the desire to really visit all continents, keep it with one venue per continent to keep the costs under control, but at the same time don't do any compromise when picking the place, go to the ultimate. And therefore, that the Intercontinental GT Challenge made a pro chain out of venues. I think this is what we bet on.
From what you've seen and from what you understand in terms of the way that venues are progressing, we know already this event and Spa are already established blue ribbon events. Suzuka absolutely could be that in the very near future as that builds as part of this chain. You've then got Laguna, which has had a bit of a checkered start to its career as part of the IGTC, but a big improvement last year. And now Kyalami. Could we be talking about 5 blue ribbon events for this championship as early as next year?
I know it's already as early as next year, as we've seen how it develops. As you say, we have seen great development in Laguna Seca, but still there's room to go. And it's hard to judge up front if Kyalami can be an outright success of that kind of scale, because it is a sole event down there. I think it will take a jump start, but all these venues have the potential in the midterm to do it. And we also got to be honest, when we praise Bathurst these days, I think it hasn't been a success of this scale when we started here in 2011, and has been developed tremendously, and I think these other places can do as well. So on the midterm, we're absolutely persuaded that the championship will grow into something big, and if it can be already in short term, to be seen how the spectators on the continents adapt to it.
Talked to SRO a little earlier this week, and they tell us that the event that the manufacturers cohort as a whole are really excited about is Kyalami. Perhaps because it's so new, perhaps because, as you quite rightly say, it's the only big event on that continent. What's Audi Sport Customer Racing's perspective on the potential for the marketability of that event?
I think for us a lot of things come together. As you say, the track itself is of true legend. If you think about racing on the African continent, you think of Kyalami. So there is some legend to be revived. Then it is probably on the most relevant market in South Africa. It doesn't compete with other big race venues on the continent. Obviously, if I look in my lineup with Calvin van der Linde, I have a local hero. So there are a lot of things that come together in Kyalami, and therefore I think the event will rock it.
Perhaps a more controversial kind of view of this. We've got now the Intercontinental GT Challenge that is growing in stature, growing in interest, with Honda and Ferrari committing this week, with Nissan committing last week. We say there's 7 other manufacturers that are going to be looking to bang down the door and see if they can steal the silverware from you. The inevitable comparison is with the FI World Endurance Championship. It's the other global event out there. You've had a key part in that from your previous role with the Audi Sport LMP1 program. Where do you see the comparisons, the contrast, the similarities, and I guess the challenges for those two products moving forward?
They're of such different character as it can be in motor racing. Obviously here we have products racing which are close to the street sports cars. Therefore, they're affordable for privateers. I mean, the cars that we race under the Audi Sport banner here are privately owned cars of investors. And when you look at the championship, as I described, it's a full chain of events. When you compare it to the WEC, obviously we were there with a piece of ultra technology with the LMP cars, which needed severe manufacturers' funding, otherwise the program couldn't have run. And it all grouped up around the main venue of Le Mans. So the focus was always Le Mans, and then it was kind of, utilize the investment to run a world championship. So as well from the character of running the championship, as well of the vehicle and technology used, they're completely different. Even so, it seemed to be there because they're both sports car series. They have something in common, but if at all, it's a silhouette and the four rings on the nose.
That's a perfectly fair comment. I guess the other yardstick we would apply to any kind of factory involvement is what you do in terms of activation. There's heavy activation around the LMP1 program. There is around the Formula E program with Alan McNish at the helm of that. We can see some activation here at the circuit, which is great to see. But is that the point, or is it more focused around literally the customer racing product?
Once again, completely different character. I think there was huge activation in Le Mans because Le Mans is this event with an unscalable heritage. And there was a lot of activation happening around that. And as I said, the other were then, the WEC was built around that. Here we see activation on each market. And if you would take Le Mans away, I think more activation happens in the Intercontinental GT Challenge because our importers, wherever we go, can identify more with the product. The guests that we invite here are usually, in our case, R8 owners. So they absolutely are R8 fans and can have a more direct link into this whole thing. We, as the Audi Sport brand, use it as a direct marketing tool within the brand. We have car launches happening around the venue and so on. So we have a much wider field for each importer where we come. And obviously we only come once into each continental region. We can focus the possibility of investment onto that venue. So, it is a wider, broader activation rather than all in for Le Mans.
The final question from me is there's different strategies being employed by the different manufacturers about how they roll out their full season challenge. We know that yours is focused around the drivers that will be out in the various teams. We've got, obviously, the well-established presence here of your customer sport operation down in Melbourne with fabulously prepared cars. What are we going to see for the remaining 4 races in terms of the teams that will fly the flag for the 4 rings?
If possible, we will always utilize local ventures, let's say. It's to give them respect of what they invest into our brand all year round, to use their local expertise and knowledge. But we also obviously see the more competition there is, the more professional it gets. But for us, the core is always customer racing, so the investment has to stay in certain boundaries. And do it like we do, I think, at the moment gives us the most efficiency in the program. And where possible, we continue like that. But in areas where we don't have, strong partners, which, for example, South Africa, we don't have that many GT3 running. We will probably utilize, our core teams from Europe that they support us down there by entering the cars.
Summarised though, this does look like at the moment a growing success story. We're already hearing of potential additional factories to join in. We're knocking on the door at the moment of, a moment in GT3 when the regulations will dictate who can continue and who can't. You're clearly not anywhere close to the cut-off in terms of the number of cars that are being built and sold. Customer racing seems to be growing. SRO firmly in control of the global product here. Strategy, from your point of view, I'm sure will be seen to be the correct one.
I think from the Audi perspective, the GT3 program has always been tremendous success. Now with the new Evos that we launched right now, we're relaunching another wave of success, and it grows the numbers tremendously once again. So therefore, the complete GT3 scene is for us an absolute success. We discussed the Intercontinental Challenge in particular, helps us to promote our product on this kind of level. In addition, obviously, we widened up the portfolio that we have accessible for our customers, especially when you look at GT3. It is entry-level platforms with the GT4 into sports car racing, or the touring cars, the RS3 LMS. So, we will continue to widen up our portfolio to cater all needs of our customers, but at the end, always based around our Light Tower project, the R8 LMS GT3.
I guess the final question from me is around the one very specific peculiarity about this event, which is it is very early in the year, and it does surround obviously an SRO product with the IGTC. What that then has caused us in years gone by is this peculiar situation when the very newest, the very best, the things that you're looking to promote to your customer racing customers is not available to you here. And extraordinarily here, we have two cars which you delivered as 2019 cars that have been reverse engineered back to be 2018 Audis. Is that something in an era now with so many factories involved that needs to be examined, and perhaps change needs to happen to allow you to bring the newest and the best?
Even so, you write a story of success. You should always be brave enough to review and see which things can you do even better. And the point that you made there, it is something that has to be reviewed. We use the unique opportunity to actually build cars back to old spec. Therefore have the latest equipment here, but to the spec as it is requested by the promoter. That discussion should be held, but it can be on a priority 3, because at the end we rehomologated the car for next year, and we won't homologate another car for 3 years, so it has to be solved in 3 years.
Chris Reinke, good luck for the weekend. Thanks for, as always, your honesty with these things, your openness. This is a place that bites. Let's hope, well, from your point of view, maybe it bites somebody else.
All right, thanks a lot, and let's hope that we get it off to a good start to the new season here.
We're back here at Mount Panorama. It's clearly a very happy place for an awful lot of people that love sports car racing, particularly those that are actually out there and racing. Tell us a little bit about the genesis of this event from the Bathurst 24 hours back in the day, but also now into what's becoming a real blue ribbon event in the sports car racing calendar.
Well, I guess Mount Panorama is a very prestigious circuit in Australia. It's the Holy Grail. It's our mountain. So traditionally, there's always been a 1,000-kilometre October race with touring cars, and that's like the biggest race of the year. But there's always been a desire for people to see more at Mount Panorama. So the 24 hours came about. Bathurst 24-hour race, and that ran for a few years, which was great. But I think it was probably a bit bigger than what Australia could kind of sustain on a domestic level. So then, with the advent of the Bathurst 12-hour, it was obviously a smaller package, easy to manage, and starting off mostly as sort of a production car plus a bit of GT racing. But with the advent of the GT3 class and this global specification of car and everything, it opened the doors for this event and this event to sort of really go out on a global scale. So when that first started, when they first had the GT3 cars here, that was 2011 when they did the switch, it was just a couple of hours. And I'm not sure anyone thought that from those days that you'd see us 9 years later with 28 GT3 spec cars out there on track and an amazing lineup of drivers.
It's world class. I think it's what you see, and we've seen that every year as the event's actually developed. And there's make no mistake, this is an iconic place, not just in Australian motorsport, but in world motorsport. And we hear that from drivers around the world, that this is a race they want to do, and I'm sure that's something that's very obvious to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always been interest, as you said, from international drivers, but prior to the GT3 spec cars being raced here, they would have to come down and drive in something unusual to them, be it a supercar or a touring car of the day or whatever it was. They'd sit on the wrong side of the car, and Australian touring cars are very different to a lot of the race cars around the world. So I think, it opened that door that you could come here and race in a GT3 spec car that is identical to what you race in the Northern Hemisphere. So it's allowed a lot of those drivers to come down and be part of it.
And it's also had another effect. What it's done is it's opened the door for homegrown Australian talent. It's a strong domestic scene, but because of the sheer physical distance, that very often those guys stay on the island. And what it's done is it's opened up the opportunities for those supercars drivers particularly to be seen and appreciated by a wider audience.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, you mentioned the supercar drivers like Chaz Mostert with BMW, Shane Van Gisbergen with both McLaren and AMG Mercedes, and also the emerging talent. We've seen both Matt Campbell and Jackson Evans come through the Porsche Carrera Cup program, go over and do the junior shootout, but they've also shone here at the 12-hour. Matt Campbell, I think quite famously, before he'd even won Carrera Cup here in Australia, was putting the car here on the podium as a Pro-Am car, and I think the world takes notice. So it's the international drivers coming down and the Australian drivers being able to sort of show what they've got as well at the same time.
So we get into the kind of the more recent years in the Bathurst 12 where truly endurance racing's attention is on this place and this week every year. The TV package that's around, not just across Australia but across the world, the numbers have gone up and up and up. It's a blue ribbon event now in its own right, there's no doubt about that. Talking to some of the manufacturers here, and they place it probably number 3 in GT racing after Spa, a race with 100 years of history. And the Nürburgring 24 Hours with just massive interest, particularly to the German manufacturers. That in itself is some achievement in such a short time.
Yeah, look, I think it's testament to the actual the track itself. Obviously, as you said before, international drivers have always had it on their bucket list. Australians have the luck that we have it in our own backyard. So it's probably not too surprising that once the door was open for the international drivers to get down here, the manufacturers could see, okay, we can now make this something. And that the manufacturers that are building GT3 spec cars are racers at heart, so that they see that what's a great driver's track, I think, is a good track for them. As a manufacturer, as a brand, and this becomes that blue ribbon event that you talk about. And I think we're honoured to have this event, as you said. Really, it's only been a few short years that it's been on the global GT scene, but it's right up there very quickly. And I guess the Intercontinental GT Challenge is showing how quickly the global series and the global appetite for GT racing is really happening right now.
Absolutely, amongst teams and drivers and the manufacturers. And we'll come to talk about that in a moment. I mean, it's been a series of rapid fire transitions to this event, from I guess what we all probably consider the dark days when there was a little bit of needle between supercars. This event. Then the event came into the hands of supercars. I think it was something probably we reflect. People were actually worried about what might happen. If anything, it's been massively positive, and it seems to be massively positive for both sides of that equation.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, there's never a positive outcome when you have, I guess, different factions within the same group, or turf war or something like that. So while unfortunately there was a year there where supercars and the 12-hour sort of had to clash, and there was a number of contributing factors at the time, certainly the year after that, when we actually took ownership in the event, I think people were surprised because they thought for some reason we were anti the event, which was of course never the case. And it's been great for our drivers. They get another opportunity to try something different. For supercars and motorsport in general in Australia, it's opening the doors to, I guess, some new fans that wouldn't normally come to a race in Australia. They might watch racing overseas, they might have an appreciation for GT racing. But to see GT racing at this spec at Mount Panorama, it gives them a drive to come. And then once they come to an event here with the 12 hour, then their mind is open, their appetite is open to, maybe I'll go to other motorsport events. So, not just supercars, but maybe MotoGP or whatever else. So any growth in motorsport is good for any series. And certainly supercars is the biggest series in Australia. So for us, any growth in motorsport is growth for them,
And in particular, it's shone a global light on just how talented the top guys in supercars are, because that's, we've seen that, we can read about that, we can watch it on TV, on very many packages, but what you've not got is a yardstick. Now you do. Now you've got Craig Lowndes and Mara Engel, and you've got, Jamie Whincup and Raffaele Marciello in the same cars, in the same race, going head-to-head. And it's been a remarkable part of that success story, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, if you think back in, the older days where we've had, a few of Australians like Peter Brock go overseas and, Larry Perkins and those guys go overseas, they'd have to go overseas and race in machinery that they weren't necessarily familiar with against the Europeans on tracks that they know like the back of their hand. I think it's very exciting to see our homegrown talent and our stars showing, they're not just, I guess, a one-car specialist, that, they are race car drivers and they're fast in whatever you put them in, and the top guys adapt very quickly to different vehicles. We've seen, Shane Van Gisbergen in McLarens, in Mercedes, AMGs, Jamie Whincup, going from Mercedes AMG, but then it's the first time he was in a Ferrari. So they can step back and forth between these cars and adapt, and when they get in there, they show their real speed.
Move on to talk about the role the growth of this, rapid growth of this event has had in what's been an explosion of interest in this Intercontinental GT Challenge. Spa 24 Hours is an established blue ribbon event. When you talk to the organisers and to the manufacturers, they next reference this event as being the other established blue ribbon event that's allowed that growth. We've had not one, not two, but three factories committing in the last week to what's now a total of 8. You're involved with the supercars. That is a very difficult thing to achieve in terms of getting multiple factories involved in putting backing behind anything, let alone a global championship.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you take into consideration that the races are run across 5 separate continents, but I think there was something very clever in when Stefan Rattel first sort of put out this concept, was he identified what were the barriers to creating a good global championship, and obviously transport costs and all that sort of part of it. And I think that's what's helped the manufacturers, is that they can use local-based teams from the region to run their factory programs in that region. And I guess it's a double thing. It's not just the ability that they can use local assets and resources, but also that they, I guess, they're partnering with their customer teams. It's not just that they're making them a customer and they're selling them product and then leaving them to it, but you become a customer of one of these manufacturers, and there's every chance that you'll also get to represent them on a global level, on a national level, and I think that creates even more appeal for that GT racing, which is what's creating this as you said, this boom, this rapid growth. It's not just that the manufacturers are interested, but their customer base are interested in being part of it, so they're going forward together. Yeah,
it's an appeal of a large event, and a recognised event with profile that actually you can do business at. We've seen this, by the look of things, your hospitality boxes here are pretty well filled this weekend.
Absolutely, yeah. Look, they're full, and probably about half of them are from the manufacturers themselves, which is fantastic. There's a portion there that are from team sponsors that aren't manufacturer related, but they're sponsoring their teams. So yeah, we've seen this event grow since 2015 even. Just the step up every year has been fantastic, and it's not just here in Pit Lane and in the corporate building, but even over in the merchandise area. The manufacturers now are all setting up merchandise stand and selling merchandise. 6 years ago, if you said to someone that you could turn up and buy, Bentley or Aston Martin merchandise, racing merchandise at a racetrack in Australia, you'd think, oh, maybe at the Grand Prix. but they're nowhere else. So, the global arms of those manufacturers are all seeing, the opportunities that this race is presenting. It's putting their brand out there on a global scale, but in a big way in the domestic market. And as you said, the brands are all recognising it as being a blue ribbon event up there just after 24 hours of Spa. But here in Australia, it's a massive, massive event.
Where does it go from here for the Bathurst 12 Hour? We've got, it's fair to say, a contraction over the last couple of years of some of the support categories in the race. It's becoming a more stacked GT3 race, and for that matter, more factory interest in that stacking. Where should it go from here? Where do you think it's going to go from here?
Well, look, I guess from my years of experience in motorsport, I never take anything for granted in terms of how much support you're going to have from whether it be factories or sponsors or anything like that. So while we've got really good growth at the moment, and we expect next year, as you mentioned, the announcement of 3 manufacturers this week joining the IGTC, and we assume that with McLaren having a new car that will be eligible for here next year, that they'll probably step up. Lamborghini have recently mentioned that they're looking to do a full-scale program. So we're going to have more interest from the factories. But I think a key part of GT racing is always those Pro-Am competitors as well. So we always have room for that. And then to the same degree, the other classes that also run the program. So here we run 3 subclasses, one being Class B, which is for a Porsche GT3 Cup car, Class C, which is GT4, and then we have an invitational class, which has become also about the locally built marque cars on this year. So whether we see as many subclasses in the future, that might be the thing that sort of varies a little bit. We've got 36 garages here, so there's only so much we can accommodate in pit lane. We don't have an unlimited supply of grid boxes.
But there's not going to be a plan that says year 2, year 3 from this point forward there will be just GT3s.
No, I don't think so. I think that would be probably a bit short-sighted, because while GT3 racing has seen a lot of rapid growth, and I think it will continue to grow, you never know what market forces might come into play in the world that could see some of those manufacturers, realign what they're doing. They might change to a different series at some point, or I guess we've seen this with DTM. 5 years ago, if you said to someone that Mercedes wouldn't be in DTM, you'd probably go, "What are you?" Sure, but that's what we're looking at now. At the same time, if you told someone 5 years ago that there'd be Aston Martins running in DTM, you'd say the same thing. So I think we've got to make sure that for the event's long-term sustainability, we don't get too far ahead of ourselves and think that this is just make it all pro and professional, and then push everyone out of the way. I think it's GT racing or endurance racing. I think has had a long history of having that multi-class grid, and I think that's the sort of thing that will always be maintained for this event.
To summarise briefly, then, what we've got is it is a major national event. It's a major international event now in terms of the television audience that's actually following it. It's clearly an event that you and the team are very proud of. Just exactly what kind of contribution do you think that success, that rapid growth has made towards the opportunity, the ability to globalise that product?
Look, I think definitely, between SRO and the Intercontinental GT Challenge, and then the Bathurst event as a standalone, collectively we've both contributed to the growth for each other. Bathurst is an iconic circuit. The level of competition here has been very strong, coming from just the local teams. I think when the first international teams came down here, they didn't just walk away with the trophy. They had to fight hard, and so I think that's been part of the growth of the Intercontinental GT Challenge is having iconic events like Bathurst, but most certainly for this event, having manufacturers get on board with the whole IGTC, showing that commitment, as we see here this weekend, that they're committed with cars for the whole season, and also brings more I guess, international recognition that rather than the event just being talked about once a year when the event's on, that every time there's a round at the IGTC, the Bathurst event is still referenced in there. It's talked about because it's round one, it's part of a series. So I guess it gives it more visibility throughout the year. So I think it's really sort of a very much a symbiotic relationship that the series and the event both brought a lot to the table, and then together we've seen great growth.
It's time for there to be a bit of a switch and we start to see this being one of the first races of the year when we see the new cars?
Look, we'd love to have that. Absolutely. I think the challenge is at the moment, obviously traditionally a BOP test has been done in March. First and foremost, there's moving the date of that, which is just scheduling really. The bigger challenge is probably getting that planned far enough ahead that the manufacturers can work their build programs around having cars ready in time for that. It's a bit of a shame that we start the 2019 season here, but in round 2 will be when the 2019 spec cars are actually seen on track. I think that's just a bit of a time thing. That as we know, the life cycles of these cars are sort of 3 to 4 years from a manufacturer. So talking to them now about having the 2020 car ready for a BOP test in say November this year, they probably can't change their planning that quickly. But for 2021. Then they might be far enough out from their completion date to say, well, okay, yeah, let's have a car ready for round 1.
So that's a global championship.
It's a global championship, and that obviously they launched their global program here at Mount Panorama. So they're launching their global program. I'm sure every manufacturer would love to be doing that with the new model car. That's certainly something that we're big advocates of as a promoter of an event. That's a massive draw card for us to have the new car here. This year, effectively the new car for us is the Bentley, which for the rest of the world is 12 months old. We'll be certainly trying to encourage manufacturers and SRO to see if we can find a way to make that happen.
So plenty of potential to come, plenty of growth potentially to come, and this place stays as special as it has been from the very start.
Absolutely. It's and I think part of what makes it so special here, a bit like places like Spa, is that it's not a permanent circuit where people just drive on it every day and whatever. It is. It's an exclusive place to come to in terms of just the number of days that are available. So I don't think it'll ever become just sort of, how can I say, run-of-the-mill type sort of thing. It's always going to have that special magic to it. And the history of this circuit, any time there's been a long-distance race at this circuit, it's been a fantastic story. There's no such thing as the boring year from Mount Panorama, from Bathurst, whether it was supercar racing or GT racing or whatever it was. No one tells you about the year that there was a dud race, and I think that's just part of the magic of this mountain.
Amen to that. Thank you very much for your time. I hope it's a very busy day.
No, you're welcome.
And we're all done and dusted with episode 2 of Inside the Sports Car Paddock, presented by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. Got a couple ideas of who I think would be fun to have on next week. If you have ideas as well, be sure to send myself or Graham a note on social media, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, and throw in some suggestions of those you'd like us to grab a short 15, maybe 20-minute interview with and bundle that into week 3's episode. With all that said, thanks for listening. The numbers were really, really good for episode 1, so we're hoping this is going to take off and just be a positive addition to our week in sports cars, and also in the open wheel world, my week in Indy cars. So, as always, I'm Marshall Pruett. This is a Marshall Pruett podcast brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. Thank you for listening.